A few years ago, a friend of mine sold his house in Denver. Nice place, paid off, sitting on a few $100,000 in equity. He drove a 10-year-old Subaru. Nobody at his office guessed he was worth more than half the executives there. Here is what most people believe about getting rich. They think it announces itself. A bigger paycheck, a nicer car, a life that visibly upgrades. But the national savings rate right now sits at just 3%. Most people earning good money are barely keeping any of it. Real wealth does not look like an upgrade. It looks almost invisible. So here is the question worth sitting with. What if the people quietly building real wealth are not doing anything you could actually see? That is exactly what this video is about. Because if you cannot recognize the pattern, you will keep measuring your progress against the wrong signals. And you will keep feeling behind even when you are not. My name is Alex. If you have ever felt like you are doing everything right and still falling short, stay with me. Because the gap is not about effort. It is about recognition. I'm going to show you 9 specific signs that separate people quietly building wealth from people who only look like they are. And I will show you the real numbers behind each one so you can see exactly where you stand. Once you see the pattern, you will stop guessing. You will just know. And it starts with something that has nothing to do with how much money you have. It has everything to do with what you do the moment you watch it disappear. Sign 1. You don't panic when the market drops. Here's a moment worth remembering. Back in late February this year, the S&P 500 dropped about 8% in 5 weeks, rattled by fresh conflict overseas. Group chats lit up. Financial headlines ran red for a month straight. Then, by the end of March, most of it had already recovered. The S&P 500 fell about 8% from February 27th through March 30th during the initial phase of the Iran conflict, stopping short of correction territory before recovering. That's the strange part about market drops. They feel enormous while they're happening and almost forgettable once they're over. The S&P 500 has experienced average intra-year declines of roughly 14% since 1990, even as long-term returns have remained positive. Drops aren't the exception. They're closer to the toll you pay for the long-term return. Here's how this played out for someone worth picturing. Dana Whitfield is 48 years old and works as a hospital administrator outside Sacramento, California. She's maxed out her 401k for years, most of it sitting in a Vanguard S&P 500 index fund through her Fidelity account. When the market dropped that week in February, her balance lost close to $11,000 in a matter of days. Her brother texted her in a panic, asking if she'd moved everything to cash. She hadn't. She left her contribution running on autopilot and didn't check her balance again for 6 weeks. Now you're probably thinking, that takes nerve. It does. But it's not really nerve. It's understanding what the money is actually for. Dana isn't touching that account for another 15 years. A 6-week dip doesn't change that math at all. Here's where it gets strange. The people who panic sell during a drop are often the same people who miss the recovery, because nobody rings a bell at the bottom. They just watch the number fall until they can't take it anymore. Sell, and then watch it climb right back up without them. If you've ever watched your balance drop and genuinely felt nothing, that's not luck. That's a sign your money's already working the way it's supposed to. But staying calm during a drop is only half the picture. The other half is what happens to the money long before it ever reaches that account in the first place. Sign 2. You're earning more, but you don't want to spend more. Here's a question worth asking yourself. When was the last time you got a raise and your spending didn't move at all? For most people, the honest answer is never. The moment more money starts coming in, more money starts going out. It's almost automatic. And right now, the numbers back this up in a big way. The national personal savings rate currently sits at around 3% of take-home pay. Personal saving was $704.2 billion in May, and the personal saving rate, personal saving as a percentage of DPI, was 3.0%. That means the typical American household earning the median income of roughly $83,700 a year is holding on to almost none of it. Let me give you a concrete example. Rachel Doyle is 39 years old and works as a marketing director in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 2 years ago, she got promoted, and her salary jumped from $95,000 to $130,000. That's an extra $35,000 a year. Around the same time, she traded in her Toyota Highlander for a Range Rover Sport moved into a bigger apartment near Lake Calhoun, and started doing Sunday brunch every week instead of once a month. A year later, she checked her savings account. It had barely grown. Here's what changed everything for her. Rachel sat down and ran the numbers on what would have happened if she'd kept her lifestyle exactly where it was and redirected that raise instead. $35,000 a year, funneled straight into her 401k, up to this year's contribution limit of $24,500, with the rest going into a regular brokerage account. Over 10 years, at a normal market return, that single decision could be worth more than $500,000. Now you're probably thinking, but don't I deserve to enjoy a raise? And sure you do. Nobody's saying live like you're still broke. The people quietly getting rich aren't skipping every reward. They're just not letting their spending rise at the same speed as their income. They keep a gap open, on purpose, every single time they earn more. That gap is where the real wealth gets built. And it turns out, one of the easiest places people let that gap disappear is sitting in their driveway. Sign 3. You don't have a car payment. Here's something that might sting a little. Take a look at your driveway. Is what's sitting in it quietly making you richer or quietly working against you? Right now, the average monthly payment on a new car in America is $770. The average new vehicle loan increased from $43,582 in the previous quarter. The average monthly payment for new cars sat between $700 and $800 in the first quarter, according to Experian data. That's not the loan. That's just the monthly bill, every month for years, on a machine that loses value the second it leaves the lot. Meanwhile, the people quietly building wealth are often driving something that looks completely unremarkable, a paid-off Honda Accord, a 10-year-old Toyota Camry with 200,000 miles on it and not a single dent that matters. Let me walk you through the math, because this is where it gets real. Take that $770 payment and invest it instead, every month, at a normal market return of around 7%. After 20 years, that grows to roughly $390,000. You'd have put in about $185,000 of your own money. The other $200,000 is just time, working while you weren't paying attention to it. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Tom Bradshaw is 52 years old and runs a small HVAC company outside Phoenix, Arizona. His neighbor leases a brand new Tesla Model X every 3 years and never stops talking about it. Tom drives a Toyota Tacoma he bought used 3 years old with 30,000 miles on it, paid off within 18 months. Same neighborhood, same income bracket. Very different balance sheets. Now, if you do have a car payment, that doesn't automatically mean you're behind. It matters what you bought and when. A car that's 3 to 5 years old has already taken its steepest depreciation hit, which means you're not the one absorbing that loss. So ask yourself honestly, is your car a status symbol, or is it just how you get to work? Because the answer to that question says a lot more about your future net worth than your current one. And once you stop bleeding money on something that only goes down in value, the next habit becomes a lot easier to spot. Sign 4. You live below your means. Here's a habit that sounds boring until you see what it actually builds. Do you know, off the top of your head, exactly how much space sits between what you earn and what you spend? Most people can't answer that. They know their income. They have no idea what's actually left over at the end of the month. And that gap, whether it's growing, shrinking, or barely there, tells you more about your financial future than your salary ever will. The median household in America currently earns around $83,700 a year. That number means almost nothing on its own. What matters is how much of it actually stays in your hands. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Christina Alvarez is 44 years old and works as a pharmacist in Tampa, Florida. A couple of years ago, she and her husband gutted their kitchen. New cabinets, a Sub-Zero refrigerator, a wolf range. The whole renovation ran close to $90,000, financed through a home equity line of credit. It looked incredible. It also quietly erased their savings gap for almost 3 years, because the payment on that HELOC ate the exact amount they used to be putting away every month. Now, living below your means doesn't mean never renovating a kitchen. It means knowing the trade-off before you make it, not after. There are really only 2 ways to widen that gap. You cut what you spend, or you grow what you earn. Cutting is usually the first move, and it's simpler than people expect. Pull up the last 3 months of your spending and just look. Most people find at least one category quietly draining more than they realized. But here's the part that matters more long-term. Growing your income tends to move the needle further than trimming expenses ever will, because there's a limit to how much you can cut, and there's no real limit to how much you can eventually earn. So the real question isn't whether you're spending less than you make this month. It's whether that gap is getting wider year over year or staying exactly where it's always been. Because once you're actually watching that gap instead of your paycheck, something else starts to shift. The whole way you think about money starts to change. Sign 5. You think in decades, not days. Here's a question that sounds simple, but isn't. When you want something expensive, how long do you actually wait before you buy it? Naval Ravikant, the investor and entrepreneur, has talked about this in a lot of interviews. And one idea he keeps coming back to is that almost everything valuable in life comes from compounding, not just money, relationships, skills, reputation. He points to Warren Buffett as the clearest example. Buffett isn't just rich because he picks good stocks. He's rich because he rarely sells anything and just keeps letting it compound, year after year, decade after decade. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Jennifer Kowalski is 46 years old and works as a dental hygienist in Denver, Colorado. Her coworker bought a Peloton bike plus the week it came out, financed a trip to Aspen for New Year's, and put a Rolex Datejust on a credit card as a reward for a good year at work. Jennifer wanted all three too, if she's being honest, but she sat on each decision for a few months. The Peloton urge faded once she started walking with a neighbor instead. The Aspen trip got replaced with a cheaper trip she actually enjoyed more. The Rolex she still thinks about sometimes. She hasn't bought it yet. That gap between wanting something and buying it, that's not deprivation. It's information. It gives you time to find out whether you actually want the thing or whether you just wanted the feeling of buying something. Now you're probably thinking, isn't that just willpower? Not really. It's closer to a filter. Long-term thinkers aren't more disciplined than everyone else in every moment. They've just built a habit of asking one question before a big purchase. Will this matter to me in 5 years? Most of the time, the honest answer is no. This is the exact same instinct that keeps someone invested through a rough market and keeps someone spending flat after a raise. It's one mindset, showing up in different rooms of the same life. And once that mindset takes hold, something interesting happens. Money stops being the only thing you start protecting. You start protecting something else too. Something you can't ever earn back once it's gone. Sign 6. You pay to get your time back. Here's a strange kind of math. What if the smartest financial move you made this month wasn't something you saved, but something you spent? Most people treat their time like it's free, because technically nobody's billing them for it. But time is the one thing on this list you can never get more of, no matter how well your investments perform. And the people quietly building wealth tend to notice that a lot earlier than everyone else. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Brian Foster is 55 years old and owns a small accounting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. For years, he mowed his own lawn, cleaned his own gutters, and did his own grocery runs every Sunday. Then his firm picked up 2 big new clients, and his hourly value at work jumped. He started paying a cleaning service $150 every 2 weeks and hired a landscaper for the yard. His wife thought it was an unnecessary expense at first. But here's what actually happened. Those few hours he got back every week didn't disappear. He put them straight back into the business. And within a year, the extra client work he took on covered the cost of the cleaning service more than 10 times over. He wasn't spending money to feel fancy. He was buying back hours and putting them somewhere that paid him more than the hours cost. Now, this isn't permission to hire out everything in your life. If you enjoy mowing your lawn, mow your lawn. The real question is narrower than that. Is this task actually worth less than what your time is worth right now? For a lot of people in their 40s and 50s running a business, managing a team, or just working long hours, the answer is yes, more often than they'd like to admit. Here's the part people miss, though. Buying back time only makes you richer if you actually use it well. Getting 3 hours back from a grocery delivery order and spending them scrolling your phone doesn't build anything. Getting those same 3 hours back and using them to think clearly, plan, or rest so you can perform better tomorrow. That's where the real return shows up. And once you start valuing your own time that highly, something else tends to happen. You stop caring nearly as much about what everyone else is doing with theirs. Sign 7. You've stopped comparing yourself to others. Here's something worth noticing about your own scrolling habits. How many times this week has looking at someone else's life made you feel behind in yours? There's a term for this that's been around for over a century: keeping up with the Joneses. And it's stuck around this long because it's one of the most quietly destructive forces in personal finance. The second you start measuring your progress against your neighbor, your coworker, or somebody's vacation photos, you've stopped playing your own game. You're playing theirs without even knowing the rules. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Kevin Torres is 50 years old and works as a regional sales manager in Austin, Texas. His neighbor put in a backyard pool last year with a full Pentair filtration system, leases a new Range Rover Sport every 3 years, and just came back from a trip carrying a $5,000 Louis Vuitton bag for his wife. Kevin used to feel a pinch of envy every time he pulled into his own driveway next to that Range Rover. Then Kevin found out, almost by accident, that his neighbor was 3 months behind on the pool loan. The lease payment on the Range Rover was $790 a month. None of it was wrong exactly, but none of it meant what Kevin thought it meant. That's the part people miss. You genuinely don't know what's behind anyone else's purchases. The new car might be leased. The dream vacation might be sitting on a credit card at 22% interest. The renovated kitchen might mean the retirement account hasn't been touched in 3 years. Comparing your finances to someone else's highlight reel is like comparing your rough draft to their finished movie trailer. Now you're probably thinking, sure, but a little competition keeps you motivated. Maybe, but motivated toward what exactly? If the goal came from someone else's life instead of your own, it's not really a goal. It's just a reaction. Here's the shift that actually happens once you stop comparing. You stop spending money to impress people you don't even think about most days. And the money that used to go toward looking successful quietly starts going toward becoming it instead. Once you get to that point, something else changes too. You stop needing anyone to know about it at all. Sign 8. You don't feel the need to talk about money. Here's a pattern worth paying attention to. Think about the people you know who talk the most about what they make, what they bought, or what something cost. Are they usually the ones who actually have the most money? Probably not. And there's a reason for that. The moment somebody gets a raise, they tell people. The moment somebody buys a new car, it's on Instagram within a day. Part of the value of the purchase, for a lot of people, is other people knowing about it. If nobody sees it, it almost doesn't feel like it happened. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Angela Whitfield is 57 years old and works as a school principal in Columbus, Ohio. Her sister-in-law brings up money constantly. What she makes, what the new kitchen cost, how her husband just got a bonus. Angela, meanwhile, has quietly built a retirement account worth close to $900,000 between her 403b and a Roth IRA. And almost nobody in her family knows it. Not because she's hiding something shameful, because she doesn't need anyone to react to it. That's really the difference. If you're constantly checking a number to see if people are impressed, the biggest part of your identity is tied to the number itself, not to what it's actually for. If you're quietly building wealth, you're paying attention to a completely different number, not your income, your net worth. And net worth doesn't care who's watching. Now you're probably thinking, isn't it normal to talk about money sometimes? Sure, with the right people in the right context. This isn't about secrecy. It's about not needing validation for decisions that were never anyone else's business in the first place. Angela isn't staying quiet to seem humble. She's staying quiet because there's nothing left to prove. If you've noticed you talk about money less than you used to, or you never really felt the pull to begin with, that's worth sitting with. It usually means the number already speaks for itself, at least to you. And there's one more sign left, one that has nothing to do with money at all anymore. It's about what happens to the things that used to feel hard. Sign 9. Sacrifices stop feeling like sacrifices. Here's something nobody warns you about when you start saving seriously. The things that feel like sacrifices at first don't actually stay that way. When you're new to building wealth, every dollar you don't spend can feel like a small loss. You skip something, and there's a little sting attached to it. That sting is real. But it's also temporary, and almost nobody tells you that part. Here's how this played out for someone I want you to picture. Gregory Hendricks is 59 years old and works as a plant supervisor outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In his 30s, packing his own lunch instead of grabbing a $12 sandwich near the plant felt like giving something up. Maxing out his Roth IRA every year, back when the limit was a few $1,000s less than it is now, Felt like money he'd never see again. He remembers sitting in the break room, a little resentful, watching a coworker walk in with fast food every single day. 30 years later, Gregory doesn't think about any of that as sacrifice anymore. Packing his lunch is just what he does. Contributing to his retirement account isn't a loss. It's just where a piece of his paycheck goes, automatically, without a second thought. Meanwhile, that coworker who bought lunch out every day retired 2 years past when he wanted to, still carrying a car payment at 62. Here's what actually happened underneath the surface. Gregory's identity changed. He stopped being someone who was trying to save money and became someone who simply doesn't spend it carelessly. Once that shift happens, the behavior doesn't take willpower anymore. It just becomes who you are. Now you're probably thinking, that sounds like it takes forever to feel that way. It does take time, but it happens faster than people expect, usually somewhere in the first year or two, once the habit stops being a decision and starts being a default. So if you've noticed that something that used to feel hard, packing a lunch, skipping a purchase, moving money into an account you don't touch, doesn't feel hard anymore, that's not nothing. That's your identity catching up to your habits. And once all 9 of these signs start showing up in your own life at the same time, they stop looking like separate habits entirely. They start looking like one thing. Nobody was ever watching the money. Here's the realization underneath all 9 of these signs. Getting rich was never loud. It was never a car, a bag, a kitchen renovation, or a number you needed someone else to react to. It was a series of small, boring decisions made consistently while nobody was paying attention. A few things are worth carrying with you. Time in the market beats timing the market. Your savings rate matters more than your salary. What you don't spend compounds just as hard as what you invest. And the moment something stops feeling like a sacrifice, that's usually the moment it starts building real wealth. So here's what to actually watch for this week. Not your account balance, your reactions. Do you flinch when the market drops? Do you feel that old pull to keep up with someone else's driveway? Notice it. That's the real signal. There's still one open question worth sitting with, though. If wealth is this quiet, how do you know you're not already further along than you think? That's worth digging into on its own. If any of these 9 hit close to home, you already know which one to think about longer.